Burma changed its name to Myanmar in 1989 to draw a line against colonialism. It became independent from Great Britain in 1948, but the vestiges of colonialization are not so easily thrown away. The military has played a leading role in government for most of those years since independence. As often happens in such situations, the army is not just a military, but also an economic institution unto itself. My name is Wayne Heimbach, and I want to thank you for joining me in Facing Reality for Social Justice as we look at the current attempt of the people of Myanmar to break away from military rule and to continue a struggle that has existed even before the British left. Most specifically, we'll be looking at the campaign in Myanmar against military conscription. On the books for over a decade, this conscription law wasn't ever enforced until February of this year. Most observers see this as an act of desperation by a government that's trying to shore up its many difficulties in the country's ongoing civil war. This current struggle against the military government is complicated, as well as difficult, and we've invited Michael Sladnick to guide us along this history. Michael is a social justice activist from Chicago who has been following the situation in Myanmar for a number of years and who moved there about a year ago to be more effective in his work. Hi, Michael. I'd like to talk to you about one of the things that became very important for what's going on in Myanmar, and this is the campaign about conscription, military conscription that's just come up. But before going into some of the details of that to see how that works and what people are, how people are relating to it, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit overall about Myanmar and the military. It's not like Myanmar is unfamiliar with military rule. It's been around for a while. And if you could talk about the sort of how people see this, what's going on now over the past couple of years, and as compared to what's been going on previously, since they had a little bit of a time there of people trying to have democratic government. That sort of fell apart, if you will, through the military. But if you could just talk about that, what people felt about it, a little bit of the history, if you will, and we get a little bit of a sense of how that's worked and how important that is.
Yeah, well, Myanmar has been the country which, in the post-war period, has had the longest period under military dictatorship. So you're definitely right that they have past experience with this. Since 1962, the country has been directly ruled by the military or through military proxy parties for the entire time, except for a 5-year period after the 2015 election, so from early 2016 until the coup in early 2021. And during that whole time, there was resistance and struggles against the military dictatorship. Right from the beginning in 1962, when the military took power, the masses in Yangon rose up against it and were slaughtered in their thousands. And coming out of that, there was always an underground struggle, which once per decade led these new uprisings against the military. So 1974 general strike, 1988 revolution, 1996 protests broke out again after that, 2007 revolution. So the 2021 Spring Revolution was only the latest in these uprisings and this tradition of a revolutionary movement against the military. So the difference this time was that they'd had this short period of democratic rule and democratic rights to organize themselves and prepare. So whereas the movements before were led by students and intellectuals, this time when the revolution began in 2021, standing at its head was the working class. There was, the protests rose up from these big factories, garment worker factories, export-oriented factories made up mostly of migrants, especially migrant women from the countryside. Their unions really led the first large-scale protests, and at the movement's head were these different groups of CDM workers, civil disobedience movement workers, which was basically a general strike. So through that, the whole population for the first time was really rallied behind this movement, because those past uprisings against the military since 1962 basically were limited to certain segments of the population, the first time especially students, intellectuals. And then 1988 was a big popular uprising, but mainly limited to the cities. Even as recently as the 2007 revolution, most people in the countryside didn't even have radios. And Myanmar is largely, the majority of the population lives in the rural areas. So the difference this time is now the whole population knows what's going on. They have the internet.
Right.
They've, feel like they're part of this world, and they're fighting to stay a part of it. And they're fully involved in the movement for democracy. And those early protests briefly captured international attention in 2021. I think it resonated right after Trump's coup attempt that this was a military doing a similar thing. The regime there claimed it lost election. So but it's continued all the way up to the present since then, the movement.
Right.
So,
well, one of the things also, though, is a history not only of a military government in Myanmar, but also resistance took a military form from fairly early on as well. A lot of this was based on ethnic organizations. Myanmar has a lot of different kinds of people. And borders are very funny. Borders are ways that pull people together, but also pull people apart, depending on how they're how they're implemented, if you will. So, could you talk a bit about the history of some of the organizations that have been fighting for decades, really, for independence? And for some kind of opposition. They were really some kind of opposition both to the military and to a lot of the establishment, I guess you would say, that had different ideas of how Myanmar should be run.
Yeah, well, I just talked about this kind of civil underground movement against the military, which is periodically, taken to the streets since 1962. But going back even further than that, there's these military struggles and insurrections in Myanmar, which started way back even before independence, 1946. Some elements of the Communist Party took up arms. 1948, just a few months after independence, the majority of the Communist Party of Burma went over to the side of the revolution. So right from Burma's independence, there was a civil war that broke out. And a lot of the minority ethnic groups, especially in the borderlands, the mountains that ring the country, used that as an opportunity to start fighting for their independence. The first major notable one was the Karen people. The Karen National Union declared the start of their Revolutionary War in January 1949, and it's continued since then all the way up to the present. So it's the longest civil war in the world, and since that time, different ethnic groups, different ethnic parties, and ethnic armed organizations have also taken up arms. The Kachin people in the north in 1960, different groups in Shan, in Rakhine, the Arakanese people, the Rohingya, so all over. And, back in the era of the Communist Civil War, which lasted from the 1940s all the way up to 1989, they did not have good relations with the Communist Party. And likewise, when the National League for Democracy appeared in the midst of the 1988 revolution and tried to channel that revolution, and eventually, after the 2015 elections took power, that party was more focused on its own interests, and the minority saw it as a Bamar-dominated party, was trying to work with the military and not standing up for these minority ethnic groups, which had been, we're still fighting and being suppressed by the military for the past 75 years. So now, for the first time, we see these different groups fighting together. The majority of the Myanmar Spring Revolution and these different ethnic groups are united fighting.
And why do you think that is? I mean, it sounds like there's a history of a military government in Myanmar. There's also a history of military opposition to that government or to the things that the government was doing. And there seems now also to be a change. And is there anything that you could point to that says this is one of the reasons that this change has happened? Possibly it had to do with the period of democracy when there were attempts to be able to pull together some kind of a parliamentary system, which was the one that was overthrown by the military government. Or is there something else? I mean, there seems to be a change, and I was just wondering if you could point us in a direction of maybe where that change came from or what the implications are.
Yeah, I mean, there's things you can go back and trace it further. Like after 1988 revolution, some young people who wanted to keep fighting from the Sunnis went and joined the ethnic armies, but they were small numbers. You had experiences during that brief period of constitutional rule that led to this. But the thing that really made this new juncture possible, where the Spring Revolution forces, the National Unity Government, and most of the ethnic armies are fighting together, has been the experiences during the revolution. So the public discourse at the start of the revolution was that this coup was a consequence of the Bamar majority's failure to stand with the oppressed minorities for all those decades, and that because they had let the military turn their guns against the oppressed, now the military was turning their guns against everyone. And tens of thousands of young people, when the military cracked down on those urban protests at the start of the Spring Revolution, they fled and joined the ethnic armed organizations to fight alongside the ethnic minority groups. Right. And the shadow government, the NUG, has taken a policy of working and coordinating closely with these ethnic armies, of setting in place a provisional federal system, which will be approved by Constituent Assembly elections after the revolution, of granting the inalienable right of every oppressed group to have their own army, and of a policy of liberating the ethnic minority areas first in the Revolutionary War, because they have suffered the longest.
Well, in the current situation, then what you're saying is that there is cooperation with between the various military formations that have been around for quite a long time, as well as with the NUG, which is the government that was set up after the coup. Could you talk a second or two about that government and its relationship? More specifically, do the rebel armies that have been around for a while recognize the NUG as their government that they're fighting for? Or what's the relationship on that level to see, where we're going to go in the future? What are the possibilities here for a unified government of one sort or another?
Yeah, so the NUG is basically, first there's the CRPH, which was a shadow parliament. So the military did the coup, it arrested who it could, but those parliamentarians who escaped arrest continued to meet underground in secret and constituted a shadow parliament. And then they formed the NUG, the government, the shadow government. So the NUG it's not a traditional government because it has very few resources. It more just has moral authority. And it legalized every single armed group that is fighting against the military and the police, whether they directly associate with the NUG or not. So it's basically just the people believe in the NUG. It does a little to raise funds from abroad to support some resistance fighters, but it can't support anybody. But so of the ethnic armed organizations, these ethnic insurrections, some are directly integrated with the new NUG's federal command structures, like the KNU, so that oldest armed insurrection. The new Karenni and Chin resistances, they're directly integrated with the NUG. Others are closely allied with it, like the KIA, the Kachin in the north. And then there's other groups other armed organizations, especially in Shan State, in Arakan State, which are generally against the coup and support the PDFs fighting under the NUG, but somewhat keep their distance from it.
Keep their distance, meaning what? I mean, are there...
They still feel like in the past they've had to fight for their own. So they support the revolution, but they don't fully trust it enough to link their fates to it completely.
Right.
They fight alongside it rather than as, directly coordinating.
So if I'm not mistaken, more or less what you're saying is that the NUG is one of a number of different forces that are fighting against the military government, but that, well, I guess that, that's politics, if you will, that needs to be worked out more specifically as things move towards getting rid of military government and coming back into some kind of a democratic situation. On the level, though, on the day-to-day level of how these things work, is there coordination between and among all the different organizations that you're talking about on military government, military affairs, separate government, various different kinds of campaigns, or are they just doing their thing, more or less, and see themselves as having something in common, which is they're fighting against the military government for an openness in society?
Besides a few dozen different ethnic armed organizations, there's literally thousands of different PDF groups, the People's Defense Forces, which are like these grassroots local armed organizations that rose up to fight back after the coup. So they all really are autonomous. The NUG does not have an administration to control them. But the public as a whole is very devoted to democracy and democratic values and believes strongly in the need for a coordinated fight against the military. And so all these different thousands of groups are composed of that public, and the public as a whole is able to monitor them over social media, watch all their activities and criticize them when they do something wrong. So really, it's surprising the level of coordination that there is on the ground. Any type of battle there's many different groups fighting together, planning it ahead for a long time. So groups really are autonomous, but highly coordinated.
But maybe they'll watch each other on Facebook or something. I mean, there's a different world that we live in, the different kind of communication, which has to have some kind of an effect on all of this. So it sounds complex, and in this complexity, you also had the military government move on the 10th of February to, I guess, reinforce a conscription rule or law to try to build up its forces. I assume one of the reasons it's doing that is because it's not doing as well as they had hoped on the military field, and they're having problems that way. And I also see that there are a number of different organizations around the world, really, that are supporting a campaign against this forced military conscription in the country. One thing I just want to read the first paragraph of is this is from a coalition of international unions who are supporting the opposition to forced conscription. On the 10th of February, the military junta of Myanmar announced that they will begin mandatory military conscriptions. We, the ETUC, and all European industrial federations completely oppose this shocking announcement, and on behalf of workers and trade unions in Myanmar and their international trade union representatives, we call on the EU member states to agree on urgent EU action as soon as possible. That's a very strong beginning three-page letter on supporting the opposition to the conscription, which a little bit surprised me, to tell you the truth, but that's quite something. But I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of an idea of this sort of bombshell, I guess, how it fell on people, what people think about it, and a little bit of the background of what the military thinks it's going to be able to get out of it.
Yeah, it was definitely a bombshell. It was shocking to people when that was announced on Chinese New Year. This modern recent decades, although Myanmar has always been in war, fighting its insurrections, it's never had conscription. Conscription law was part of the 2008 military semi-democratic constitution, but this was the first time it's enacted. So this revolutionary war against the coup has been going on for the last 3 years. And despite the fact that it's getting no international support, because the population is so rallied around it, so opposed to the military has no real base of popular support. And then it's also able to build off these ethnic insurrections, which have conquered their own territories, been going on for decades. So because of that, the military has suffered significant losses over the past 3 years. The official estimates are 55,000 or so military dead up to the present, or more than that.
Okay.
So the military is not able to make up these losses. It's tried to form local militias, a loyal party activists, but those people are few in number and a lot of old men and stuff, and trying to get their own officials, office workers to fight for them. So it's been losing more and more land, and especially since this past fall, the past 5 or 6 months, a lot of new ethnic offenses fighting alongside the PDF revolutionary forces have gained lots of territory, taken over hundreds of bases and towns in the borderlands. So as the military is falling back, people see this conscription as a desperate gambit. Its last recourse to try to replenish its ranks. And it really is desperate because it knows the population hates it. The military does not even try to put out a propaganda line about what it's fighting for, except for sometimes saying we're fighting to be a Buddhist country. If you don't buy that, it doesn't even try to convince you to be outside. It just says you have to obey, and it beats you down if you don't. So, and now it's going to try, it's past 2 years, the kind of the social contract it offered to young people, especially in the cities who weren't able to participate openly in the revolution anymore for no fault of their own, was that, you can go back to your normal life and we'll just leave you alone. Now it wants those young people who hate it to fight for it. So, since February, it's just abducting people off the street, press ganging people, stopping buses on the road, dragging young men and women off to conscript them. And, these are people who do not, under any circumstances, want to fight for the military. So you have a new wave of thousands of young people trying to join the resistance rather than have to fight on the military side.
Right, and I assume also a lot of the younger people would prefer to leave Myanmar for a while until things settle down.
Yes, I mean, there's a huge rush of people who want to leave, and the military is making that difficult because they put up, for example, new requirements that to get the papers you need to leave, if you don't already have them, you have to get permission from local regime officials. So, for anyone who's involved in the resistance or anything, that is impossible. And even if you're not, they're going to require a huge bribe. And so it's a very difficult situation for everybody in Myanmar right now.
Yeah.
Young people are afraid even to go out. Cities, the economy is grinding to a halt because people are just hiding in their homes.
Right. Okay. Now, let me ask you this. Is the campaign against this organized in any way, like through the NUG or through different of the PDFs that you had mentioned are around the country, or is it just done on an individual level that people are refusing to go or trying to get out of it or doing whatever they're doing and don't want to help the military in this situation?
Yeah, there's been continuing protests alongside this armed uprising against the coup. There's been continuing protests the last 3 years, every single day up to the present. So those protests have focused recently against this conscription law to try to, plant a pole that the public opposition, it's not just individual acts. But there is the recognition that in general, they need to organize the resistance to the conscription. But theoretical agreement on that and actually turning that into action takes time, because the way the conscription is being carried out is just, like I said, abducting individuals off the street, basically. So there are organizations of CDM soldiers who joined the revolution, and supporting soldiers, working with soldiers who are still in the regime military, but who oppose the coup and oppose the dictatorship. Because for a lot of them, they are controlled, their families live on bases, so they don't want to fight. They want to run away, but they don't have the opportunity. So, the hope is through those existing organizations and links with people who are being chaotically conscripted now, that over time, opportunities for organized resistance from both outside of the military and from within, from people who don't want to be fighting on the military side, can be organized. But any revolution, any war, that thing takes time.
One of the things, from that letter that I read previously, this is from the International Trade Union Movement supporting the campaign against conscription. But I was also wondering, and I haven't seen anything one way or the other, have the unions inside of Myanmar taken any particular position? I would assume that they would be part of this process of really not wanting this conscription to go on. But do you know if there's been any official position that they've taken?
I believe the All Burma Federation of Trade Unions has taken a position.
Okay, yeah, that's
yeah.
No, I would assume so, but I just thought I would ask. I mean, when you're sort of underground as a union movement, sometimes things are difficult, and there's a lot of things that go back and forth, which is actually an issue I'd like to talk to you about another time as well. But I would assume that they would take such a position, since most of their members, both young men and women, are people who are, part of this process of the conscription. So it really concerns them very, very seriously. Well, I want to thank you, Michael, for this. I would like to talk to you another time or two about some of the things that are going on in Myanmar, and I look forward to doing that. But in the meantime, if people have, if they want, I know on Facebook they can see your posts, which are frequent and quite detailed, about what's happening on the ground. But are there other things that people could do as well to try to help out with what's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, if possible, I'd say contact your local Burmese community, your local Myanmar community. But in general, in terms of what I can offer to help facilitate people to support this revolution, which really, no government, no NGO is supporting it. So it depends mainly on the diaspora around the world and regular people around the world supporting it. So I could talk about this in a future time, but a comrade and I recently went on a trip to Karenni, which is the area which is closest to being completely liberated. So the page that we are organizing that campaign, that fundraising campaign through, is Myanmar Solidarity on Facebook. Now, as of early April, we're just getting that campaign set up. So by later in April, there should be a lot of information on there. And, we want to use that page not just to support Karenni, but I've also, for the past 3 years, been closely supporting these strike committees, which are leading protests, and underground activists on the ground all over Myanmar. So
tremendous.
These people really need support from international activists,
Right.
People who want care about social justice and democracy around the world. So any type of support we get through that.
We'll put the military behind us for a while, and maybe next time what we can do is either talk about some of the advances of democracy in Myanmar, but for sure we'll talk about the people trying to make sure that happens. And I thank you very much for this conversation, Michael, and I look forward to talking to you again. So take care.
Thank you so much, Wayne. Take care. See you next time.
Michael sent us the music piece that we heard at the beginning of today's episode. It's a song often used by the Movement for Democracy in Myanmar, and we thank him for sending it to us. It's a song of hope for a better future and a remembrance of the martyrs who fell because of the bloodshed caused by the military. This is the piece, the full piece that Michael sent. Finally, we want to thank you for joining me in facing reality for social justice. This is Wayne Heimbach.